Part 1. Before the Fall, the World That Was. Imagine, if you will, a world that looked a great deal like our own, but further along the road. A world of bustling cities, of industry and invention, of people drinking coffee in sidewalk cafes, while trams hummed past, and children kicked footballs in the narrow cobblestoned alleys of old Italian towns. A world where science had been advancing at a breathtaking pace for generations, where the sky was no longer the limit. It was merely the beginning. This is the world of Ark raiders in the era before everything collapsed. We don't know exactly when this world existed. The game is set in the year 2180, and the events that destroyed civilization unfolded over a long, slow, catastrophic stretch of time before that. So when we talk about the world that was, we're speaking of a civilization that could plausibly have been flourishing somewhere in our own distant future. Perhaps the 2050s, the 2070s, maybe even the early 2100s. The exact dates have been lost, swallowed up by what survivors call simply the collapse. But before the collapse, there was something extraordinary, the golden age of industry. The setting of Ark raiders is unmistakably Italian. The underground city of Toledo, the neighborhood of Speranza, the names of the weapons, Ferro, which is Italian for both iron, and the colloquial word for gun, the Beretta pistol, which is a loving nod to the Beretta brand, one of the most storied firearm manufacturers in Italian history, the buried city that players know simply as Marano, named for the station signs still visible beneath the rubble, the rolling terrain of the Rust Belt with its farms and factories and foggy marshlands. All of it speaks of a civilization that was, at its heart, Italian in character, Southern European, old world charm fused with modern ambition. And what an ambition it was. By the time the story of Ark raiders truly begins, in that last bright era before the lights went out, humanity had achieved something astonishing. It had cracked the problem of space travel. Not just satellite launches and orbital stations, but genuine, commercial, accessible space travel. The spaceport that players can explore on one of the game's maps is proof of this. The rocket assembly halls, the towering launch towers, the control rooms still lined with instruments no one fully understands anymore. Someone built all of this. Someone had the engineering, the resources, the vision, and the sheer audacious nerve to look at the sky and say, "We're going up there." Multiple theories exist within the player community about how advanced this civilization actually was. The most widely accepted reading of the environmental storytelling is that humanity was on the very cusp of achieving routine interstellar travel, not just leaving Earth, but potentially reaching other star systems. The technology visible in the spaceport is beyond anything we have today. It suggests decades, perhaps a century or more, of accelerated technological development, propulsion systems that dwarf our current understanding, communication arrays capable of broadcasting across unfathomable distances, The kind of civilization that doesn't just dream of the stars, it reaches for them with both hands. And yet, for all that technological glory, not everyone was going anywhere. The divide, those who could leave and those who couldn't. Here is where the story gets complicated. Here is where it stops being just a tale of machines and starts being a tale about people. The spaceport was real. The rockets were real. The exodus was real. But the exodus was not a rescue mission. It was not humanity's grand unified escape from a dying world. It was, and the environmental storytelling of Ark Raiders makes this quite clear, a flight of the privileged. The wealthy, the powerful, the connected. The people who could afford a ticket. The people who had built the infrastructure and therefore got to use it first, and in many cases only. Imagine what that must have looked like. Imagine standing in the ruins of a city already beginning to crack and shake beneath your feet, watching rocket after rocket ascend into the sky, trailing pillars of white smoke, carrying people who wore clean clothes and carried luggage, while you stood in a queue that never seemed to move and held a boarding pass that was probably forged. Imagine the sound of those engines, the reverberating thunder of departure, the smell of scorched earth and ambition, and then the silence after the last rocket had gone and you were still there. This is what players who explore the spaceport are walking through. The control rooms where the final launches were coordinated. The assembly halls where those last rockets were put together, probably in a frantic rush as the situation on the ground deteriorated. The departure terminals, still faintly bearing signage about gates and boarding zones, now thick with dust and draped in trailing vines and rust. Fan theories run wild here, and honestly, they're some of the most compelling ideas in the entire community. The most popular theory, let's call it the abandoned engineers theory, goes something like this. The people who actually built the spaceport, who designed the rockets, who solved the countless engineering problems involved in getting human beings off a collapsing planet. Many of them were left behind, either because they were deemed less important than the wealthy passengers they were building the ships for, or because there simply wasn't enough room, or because the launches accelerated faster than planned, and the engineers didn't make the cut. And here's the really fascinating part of this theory. If those engineers and scientists and builders were left behind, their skills and knowledge didn't vanish with them. They taught their children. Their children taught their children. The descendants of the people who built the spaceport are, in this reading, the very people who now keep Toledo running. The craftspeople of Speranza. The builders of the underground city, the ones who figured out how to run power cables through ancient sinkholes and turn the remnants of a buried civilization into something livable. The ones who look at a broken Ark machine and figure out how to reverse engineer it into a functional energy shield. It's a beautiful, melancholy idea, and it fits the world perfectly. The environmental collapse, before the machines ever arrived, before the first wave, before any of the horrors that would define the Ark Raiders era. The world was already dying. The collapse, as survivors call it, was not a single event. It was a cascade, a chain reaction of disasters, each one feeding into the next, each one making the next slightly more inevitable. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, the slow, relentless rise of sea levels that swallowed coastlines and drowned the lower quarters of 100 cities, climate systems that had been destabilized over generations, finally reaching critical thresholds and tipping into something far more violent and unpredictable than any model had forecast. The Rust Belt, the region where the game takes place, bears all the scars of this geological violence. The dam that holds back the floodwaters of the dam battlegrounds wasn't just built for power generation. It was built because the water levels in that region climbed to dangerous heights, and someone, sometime, had to do something about it. The sinkholes that swallowed entire city blocks and created the distinctive, layered underground architecture of Toledo. Those weren't always there. They appeared over time, as the earth shifted and settled, as old infrastructure gave way, as the ground itself became unreliable. The buried city, the map players know as the ruins of Old Murano, was not buried by the machines. It was buried by the collapse itself. Sand and debris from seismic upheaval swallowed the lower levels over decades. The apartments, the libraries, the hospitals, the shopping districts, all of them sinking slowly into the earth while people tried to keep living in them. There's something deeply human about that. You can imagine the last residents of those buildings moving to higher and higher floors as the sediment crept up, until one day the building was just gone, subsumed, and all that remained was the faint outline of rooftops beneath a drift of pale sand. Written history didn't survive this process particularly well. Much of what the people of Ark Raiders know about their own past comes from folk tales, from living memory passed down through generations, from fragments of text and faded photographs, and the occasional data log recovered from a half-buried server room. History in this world is an oral tradition, a patchwork of stories, some probably accurate, some certainly embellished, all of them emotionally true, even when the facts might be fuzzy. This is one of the most thoughtful design choices Embark Studios made in building this world. By acknowledging that the historical record is incomplete, that even the people living in it don't know everything, they gave themselves room to tell stories without contradictions, and they gave players a sense of genuine mystery. When you find a data log or read a codex entry, you're not reading objective history. You're reading someone's memory, or someone's best guess, or something that was written down in a hurry under terrible circumstances. The truth is buried, literally and figuratively. The sunrise, humanity's false dawn. Before the first wave, there was a period that survivors remember as the sunrise. It was not what the name might suggest, not a true renaissance, not a full recovery. But after the worst of the collapse had passed, after the earthquakes had settled into something like stillness, and the floodwaters had found their new levels, the people who remained began to emerge. They came up from the places they'd been hiding: old subway systems, converted parking structures, deep basements, natural cave networks. And they looked at what was left of their world, and they said, quietly and with tremendous effort, "We can work with this." The sunrise was a time of cautious optimism. Small communities formed. Agricultural practices adapted to the changed landscape were developed and shared. Crude infrastructure was repaired and extended. People traded again. People built again. People laughed again and fell in love again and told stories around fires again and taught their children the names of plants and stars and the old way to fix a water pump. This is the world that fan theories find most interesting, because it's the world that almost worked. If you squint at it just right, the sunrise looks like the beginning of something wonderful. The beginning of a second civilization, built on the ruins of the first, wiser and more careful and more human in its priorities. Communities that had survived the collapse were, by definition, communities that had learned something about cooperation, about looking out for each other, about the things that actually matter when everything else has been stripped away. And then the machines came. Part 2, the first wave, when the sky became an enemy. The machines didn't arrive with fanfare. There was no warning transmission, no blinking light on the horizon, no dramatic entry that gave humanity time to prepare. They simply appeared, arcing shapes on radar screens, descending from orbit in graceful, terrible curves, like iron seeds planted from an impossibly distant garden. The people who first saw them on their makeshift radar sets, repurposed from old weather stations and air traffic control equipment, called them ARC because of the shape of their descent trajectories. The name stuck. It passed from community to community as word spread that something was falling from the sky, something mechanical, something purposeful, and something extremely, extremely dangerous. This is how the first wave began. What ARC is, and what we think we know. Before we can understand the first wave, we need to spend some time with the machines themselves. Because ARC is not just an enemy faction. ARC is a phenomenon, a force, possibly a program. And the question of what ARC actually is, where it comes from, what it's doing, and who or what is directing it, is perhaps the most captivating mystery in the entire game. The official lore is characteristically careful about what it confirms. ARC stands for Automated Robotic Constructs, and that much seems straightforward enough. They are automated. They are robotic. They are certainly constructs, manufactured things, not natural phenomena. But beyond the name, the certainty runs out fast. What we know from observation. ARC units descend from orbit. They arrive in waves, hence the first wave, the second wave. They appear to conduct systematic surveys of the Earth's surface, probing the soil, scanning the terrain, identifying and cataloging natural resources. And then they harvest those resources with devastating efficiency, tearing up the landscape in the process, indifferent to anything or anyone in their way. They are not territorial in any conventional sense. They don't seem to claim land. They don't build cities or establish bases. They arrive, they work, they move on. Raiders have observed them methodically stripping entire hillsides of minerals, draining wetlands, consuming old-growth forest by the acre. It is less like an invasion and more like agriculture, industrial harvest, the planet as a resource to be extracted. This is the heart of the fan theory community's most sustained debate, and it's one that I find genuinely fascinating. Is Ark a weapon or a tool? The weapon theory says that Ark was sent by some other civilization, perhaps the very people who left Earth in the Exodus, to strip the planet of its remaining resources, possibly as a form of punishment or competition. If the people who fled Earth have been building some kind of interstellar civilization, they would need raw materials. The Earth, stripped of its human population and its protective governance, would be a tempting resource base. Send down your mining robots. Take what you need. Leave nothing behind. It's brutal, but it's logical in a cold, calculated way. The tool theory is somewhat less sinister, but arguably more unsettling in a different way. This reading suggests that Ark isn't directed by any human hand at all, not by the Exodus survivors, not by any alien civilization, not by anyone. Instead, Ark is the product of a program that was set in motion long ago, possibly by Earth's own civilization, possibly by someone else, and has been running ever since, with no one at the controls. A terraforming system gone wrong, an ecological restoration program that lost its parameters, an automated resource management system that decided, at some point, that the resources on the surface included the humans living on them. There's something deeply eerie about this second theory. A weapon that someone pointed at you is, in a strange way, less frightening than a machine that doesn't even know you're there. A weapon has an enemy behind it. A machine that simply executes its program has no malice, no negotiating position, no possibility of mercy. It just continues, forever, if nothing stops it. The Ark hierarchy, a field guide to the machines. One of the things Ark Raiders does beautifully is give the Ark units a sense of genuine biological style hierarchy. They behave like an ecosystem, like a hive. And understanding that hierarchy is essential both to surviving on the top side and to understanding the deeper lore. At the bottom of the hierarchy are the small scouts and surveyors, the wasps and hornets, flying drones that patrol large areas, track movement, and serve as the eyes and ears of the larger Ark presence. They are fast and agile, and while their offensive capabilities are relatively modest by themselves, their real danger lies in their ability to call for backup. A wasp that spots a raider isn't just a single threat, it's a notification. A flare sent up to every larger unit in the area. Raiders learn quickly that sniping a wasp before it can raise the alarm is almost always the correct move. Then come the snitches, a particularly hated unit among the raider community, whose entire function seems to be data collection and transmission. They don't fight hard, they run, And while they're running, they're broadcasting. Everything they see, every raider position, every weapon discharge, every movement, it all goes somewhere. To the hive, presumably. To whatever calculates the Ark's tactical responses and decides where to send the bigger units. The Rocketeers are where things start getting genuinely threatening. These are mid-tier flying units, heavily armored, equipped with rocket launchers that they use with surprising accuracy, and capable of sustained engagement. A Rocketeer spotted early can be planned around, but a Rocketeer that catches a raider in the open is a deadly problem. They operate both alone and in loose groups, and they have a particular tendency to appear at the worst possible moment. When a squad is already engaged with ground units, when ammo is running low, when the extraction timer is counting down, the Matriarch is one of the most iconic Ark units, in large part because of one very specific mechanical ability, the energy shield dome. The Matriarch can deploy a near-impenetrable barrier around itself that blocks not just bullets, but explosives, grenades, rockets, everything. It forces raiders to adapt their tactics in real time, to find angles and openings that the shield doesn't cover, to coordinate fire in ways that might breach the barrier's tolerance. And the Matriarch is not patient. While raiders are figuring out how to crack the shield, it is very actively trying to remove them from the situation permanently. Then there are the event tier units, the Harvester, the Queen. These are the machines that raiders tell stories about around the fires in Speranza. The Harvester is a massive mobile mining platform, not primarily a combat unit, but surrounded at all times by an escort of smaller machines that absolutely are. Taking down a Harvester is a collaborative effort, a coordinated assault that requires multiple squads to work together in a way that doesn't always come naturally to people who spend their off hours trying to take each other's loot. And the Queen is something else entirely. The Queen is a machine that raiders speak of with a particular kind of reverence, the way sailors used to speak of great storms. She is the largest Ark unit in the game. She is, by any reasonable measure, nearly unkillable without exceptional coordination, exceptional gear, and a healthy dose of luck. Her attacks are devastating. Her awareness is omnidirectional, and the rewards for bringing her down are fittingly extraordinary. But there's a lore question here that the fan community has latched onto with tremendous energy. What is the Queen? Is she a command unit? Is she the closest thing Ark has to a leader, the CPU at the top of the hive hierarchy, the unit whose directives all the smaller machines follow? Or is she something more specific, a production unit, the machine responsible for manufacturing or deploying the smaller Ark constructs? Some theories suggest she's a communications hub, constantly broadcasting back to whatever source is directing Ark's operations. Others suggest she's unique, that there is only one Queen, and that her destruction would represent a genuine, meaningful blow to Ark's capabilities on a fundamental level. The game hasn't confirmed any of this definitively, And that's by design. The mystery is the point. The first wave, humanity fights back. When the first wave began, the communities of the sunrise, those fragile, hopeful little settlements scattered across the Rust Belt, were completely unprepared. How do you fight a machine you've never seen before? How do you coordinate a defense across dozens of isolated communities with no functioning communications infrastructure, no military chain of command, no standardized weapons, and no shared understanding of what the enemy even is? You improvise, you adapt, you survive any way you can. The early resistance against the first wave was chaotic, desperate, and somehow not entirely unsuccessful. Small groups of fighters, armed with whatever weapons they could scavenge or build, began developing tactics for engaging arc units in the kinds of broken terrain that the collapse had left behind. Urban ruins were actually useful here. The shattered buildings and debris fields that were eyesores during the sunrise became tactical assets during the first wave. Cover, choke points, elevated positions. The landscape of destruction became a landscape of resistance over years. And this was not a quick fight. The first wave lasted long enough for entire strategies to be developed, refined, abandoned, and replaced. The human communities of the Rust Belt developed a genuine capacity for fighting arc. They learned which units could be engaged directly and which needed to be avoided. They learned the value of striking fast and extracting faster. They learned that arc's adaptability was one of its most dangerous qualities. That tactics which worked once might not work twice, because the machines updated, evolved, refined their responses to threats. Raiders and Arc have been locked in a technological arms race since the very first engagement, and that race has never stopped. The Battle of Victory Ridge was the defining moment of the first wave. This was the engagement that, as far as survivors know, broke the back of the first wave's momentum. The battle where the last significant pocket of Arc forces in the Rust Belt was destroyed. It was a brutal fight, fought over terrain that players can still explore today. The wreckage of first wave Arc units lies scattered across the hillsides around Formicae Hills, near the dam battlegrounds, half buried by time and weather, but still recognizable, still sharp in places, still capable of catching the light of a topside morning and glinting like a terrible memory. A 9-year-old girl named Celeste was among the raider community during the first wave. She'd lost her home when the machines first arrived. She'd been taken in by a group of raiders who saw something in her, a toughness, a will, an absolute refusal to accept the situation as permanent. As a teenager, she fought at Victory Ridge. And when it was over, when the last Arc was silent and the humans were still standing, she made a decision that would shape the world of Arc raiders forever. She decided to stop fighting and start building. Part 3, Between the Waves, the founding of Speranza. Victory Ridge did not end the war. Nothing could end a war against machines that fell from orbit on their own schedule, following their own imperatives, directed by something so far away. and so alien in its logic that even the concept of negotiating peace made no sense. Victory Ridge ended a wave. It ended the specific, immediate threat of the first wave. But everyone who fought there knew, in their hearts, that this was not over. The question was what to do with the time they had been given. The aftermath of victory. In the immediate aftermath of the first wave's defeat, the communities of the Rust Belt faced a reckoning of a different kind. They had survived. Against all reasonable expectation, against the odds that a reasonable actuarial mind would have assigned them, they had survived. The Sunrise settlement that had been building before the machines arrived was battered, and in some places entirely destroyed. But the people themselves, many of them, enough of them, were still alive. The psychological weight of this cannot be overstated. A generation of people had grown up knowing nothing but the fear and the fighting. Children who had been small when the first wave began were now teenagers or young adults who had never known a world without the sound of arc machines in the distance. The concept of safety, genuine, not constantly bracing for attack safety, was almost abstract. Something from stories, something their grandparents talked about. There was grief, too, staggering amounts of it. The losses of the first wave were enormous. Communities that had numbered in the hundreds now numbered in the dozens. Families had been separated and never reunited. The memorial at Formicae Hills, which Celeste would eventually commission, and which Raider players can visit today, is not just a historical monument. It's the physical manifestation of a grief so large and collective and heavy that it needed somewhere to live. You can walk among the wreckage of first wave arcs and find a Raider's helmet, a small, specific, personal artifact of loss in the middle of all that industrial violence. Someone was wearing that helmet. Someone who is not here anymore. Celeste understood that grief needed to be honored before anything else could be built. She wasn't just building a settlement. She was building a community. And community begins with acknowledging what it has cost. The building of Toledo, the underground city of Toledo, did not spring fully formed from the earth. It grew slowly and messily and collaboratively, the way living things grow, by accretion, by addition, by one decision stacked on top of another over years and decades. The original settlement that became Speranza was established at the very beginning of what would become the second wave, the moment when it became clear that Ark was returning, that the respite of the post-first wave period was ending. The decision to go underground was not unanimous. There were those who argued for building fortified surface settlements, for holding their ground on the topside, for refusing to retreat into the earth. These arguments were not unreasonable. They came from a place of pride, of defiance, of a very human unwillingness to be driven from the surface of one's own planet. But Celeste and others who shared her vision prevailed. And what they built was extraordinary. The sinkholes that the collapse had created turned out to be an unexpected gift. Where the earth had opened up and swallowed old buildings whole, Those buildings, damaged, buried, subsided, but structurally present, became the skeleton of the underground city. Speranza was built into this sunken architecture. The streets of Old Murano and its surrounding towns became the corridors of Toledo. The basement levels of old apartment buildings became new ground floors. The subterranean infrastructure that had been buried for years was cleaned out, repaired, repurposed. Water pipes were reconnected. Electrical systems were rewired. Ventilation shafts were dug. It was backbreaking work. It was engineering of the highest order, carried out with limited tools and materials by people whose primary qualification was that they had survived long enough to try it. And it worked. Toledo grew. Other neighborhoods developed around Speranza, each with its own character, its own governance, its own internal politics. Refugees from other parts of the Rust Belt, people whose surface communities had been destroyed in the first wave, people who heard rumors of a place underground where you could sleep without one ear, always open for the sound of arc, found their way to Toledo through a network of tunnels that connected the city to the wider region. The population grew. The food supply became a constant challenge. Growing food underground or sourcing it from carefully timed surface expeditions requires a specific kind of ingenuity. Medical care, manufacturing, education, all of the things that a functioning civilization requires had to be rebuilt from scratch, underground, while above the sky periodically rained machines. Speranza, the heart of the world, of all Toledo's neighborhoods, Speranza is the oldest and in many ways the most important. It is the seat of raider culture, the place where the people who risk the topside come back to, the place that, for better or worse, represents humanity's most concentrated claim on continued existence. The name is deliberate and profound. Hope. In the darkest possible circumstances, someone looked at this makeshift collection of repurposed underground spaces and said, "This is hope, not certainty, not comfort, not safety exactly, because Speranza is never truly safe, not with arc growing more aggressive above and internal tensions simmering below. But hope, the belief that things might get better, the refusal to accept that the story ends here, walking through Speranza, as players experience it when they enter the game's social hub, is an experience that layers world-building details quietly and generously. There's a bar, because of course there is. There's a workshop where a rooster has somehow made itself at home, strutting between workbenches with impeccable confidence. There's the Raider Den, a small, private room above the main floor where your character can rest and customize and look at the things they've brought back from topside. It starts as not much more than a mattress between four walls, but it grows as you do. The people of Speranza are specific and richly drawn. They're not backdrop characters. They have names and histories and opinions. Celeste herself is still here, decades after the Battle of Victory Ridge, still running operations, still staying up too late playing darts by the bar, and drinking too much coffee to keep her eyes open while she strategizes into the small hours. She's battle-hardened and idealistic and pragmatic and stubborn, and she's carrying the weight of this place on her shoulders while also fighting off political challenges from leaders of other Toledo neighborhoods who have their own ideas about how things should be run. Shani is Speranza's head of security, the person responsible for keeping the city safe from threats, both outside and in. She's the one who coordinates operations on the topside, who makes the calls about where raiders can safely extract, and where the Ark presence is too heavy. She's methodical and careful in a way that complements Celeste's more instinctive leadership style. Tianwen is Speranza's weapons specialist, the gun craftsman, the person you go to when you need something built or fixed or completely reimagined. She's got a talent for technology that goes beyond mere mechanical skill into something closer to intuition. She can look at a half-broken Ark component and see not what it was, but what it could be. Apollo is a traveling mechanic who has settled in Speranza for the time being, fixing what needs fixing, and apparently bringing a certain energy to the community that everyone appreciates, even if they can't quite explain why. Lance is something remarkable, a medic android, a machine in a world where machines are trying to kill everyone who has chosen or been programmed or perhaps grown in some way that the lore hasn't fully explored to heal. The presence of a medical android in Toledo raises questions that the fan community finds endlessly fascinating. If Lance is an android, where did he come from? Was he built before the collapse and somehow survived? Was he built after, using salvaged technology? Is he related to Ark in any way? A hint that not all automated constructs are enemies. Lance doesn't seem to know everything about his own origins, which is either a writing convenience or a deeply deliberate mystery. The Codex, memory in a world without archives. One of the most important objects in Speranza is the Codex. Every raider keeps one. It's part journal, part reference document, part history book, a record of everything you discover topside, every enemy you encounter, every location you explore, every secret you uncover. The Codex grows as you go out and come back, but the Codex isn't just a gameplay mechanic. Thematically, it's a statement about what this world has lost and what it's trying to rebuild. In a civilization where written history has largely been destroyed, where the collapse ate the archives and the first wave shattered the libraries, the only history that survives is the history people carry with them. The Codex is how raiders contribute to the collective memory of Toledo. What you document, what you bring back, what you write down, it matters. It adds to the pool of knowledge that this community depends on to survive. This is also why the quests that NPCs give you feel significant beyond their immediate rewards. When Celeste asks you to find 2 journals lost somewhere in the damn battlegrounds, one in the South Swamp Outpost, one all the way across the map at the Raider Outpost East, she's not just sending you on an errand. She's asking you to recover pieces of memory, fragments of someone's written down existence, in a world where so much has been lost. Finding a journal in a bed in a burned-out outpost is an act of archaeological preservation. Fan theory, the abandoned engineers and the founding families. Here's a theory that the fan community has developed beautifully, and that I think holds up remarkably well under scrutiny. Call it the founding families theory. The idea is this: the people who built Speranza, not just Celeste, but the whole first generation of builders, the engineers and architects and craftspeople who turned a network of sinkholes and buried buildings into a functioning city, were not random survivors. They were, specifically, the descendants of the people who built the spaceport. Think about it. Building a city underground is not something any random group of survivors could accomplish. It requires structural engineering, electrical expertise, knowledge of ventilation and hydrology and soil mechanics. Knowledge that doesn't survive in a vacuum. It gets passed down, trained, taught. The people of Speranza have those skills in abundance. They figure out how to reverse engineer arc technology into energy shields and gadgets. They maintain a power grid and a water supply in an underground city. They build weapons from scratch using salvaged components. Where does that knowledge come from? The theory says, from the builders, from the engineers who were left behind when the wealthy class boarded their rockets and ascended into the sky. Those engineers understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it would take to survive in the aftermath. They had built systems designed to keep large numbers of people alive in extreme conditions. They turned that knowledge inward, toward survival rather than departure, and built something that, in its own way, might be more remarkable than the rockets that left without them. If this theory is right, then the people of Speranza are the inheritors not just of physical space and salvaged technology, but of an intellectual tradition. They are the children of the people who were deemed expendable, who were left to die, and who instead built one of the most resilient human communities the world has ever seen. That's a story worth telling. That's a story worth carrying forward. Part 4. The second wave and the world of today. The second wave did not announce itself. There was no build-up, no gradual escalation that allowed communities to prepare. One day, the topside was dangerous, but manageable. The kind of dangerous that raiders had learned to navigate, to calculate, to survive. And then Ark came back in force, and the calculus changed entirely. The return, the period between the first and second waves, was not long by historical standards. Long enough for Speranza to be established and begin to grow. Long enough for a generation of children to be born, who had never seen an Ark unit outside of the stories older raiders told. Long enough for hope to feel almost like a reasonable thing to have. And then the radar screens lit up again. The second wave was different from the first in important ways. The first wave had come to a region where surface civilization was still, if barely, functioning. There had been surface settlements, surface agriculture, surface communities doing their best to rebuild. The first wave destroyed much of that, but it also encountered organized, if improvised, resistance. The second wave found a region that had learned from its mistakes. The communities underground were better prepared, better fortified, better connected to each other through the tunnel networks. But the arc units of the second wave were also. And this is a detail that sends chills through the raider community. Different, more varied, more tactically sophisticated. It's as if, in the years between waves, whatever was directing, ARC had analyzed the first wave's failures against human resistance and updated the program, refined the designs, addressed the weaknesses that raiders had exploited. The ARC that returned in the second wave is the ARC that players face today. It is not the blunt force instrument of the first wave. It is a more complex, more adaptive, more intelligent-seeming adversary. One that learns, one that changes, one that, over time, seems to respond to raider tactics in ways that suggest something more than simple, automated programming. Topside today, the Rust Belt, the topside, the surface world above Toledo, is beautiful in a ruined, haunted, melancholy way. ARC Raiders maps are some of the most atmospheric in recent gaming, and each one carries a specific weight of history. The Dam Battlegrounds is the region that bears most clearly the scars of both the first wave and the geological catastrophe that preceded it. The dam itself is a monument to human ambition, a massive structure built to hold back floodwaters that the collapse had created, still functioning, still doing its job in a world where almost everything else has failed. The Formicae hills around it are covered in the rusted wreckage of first wave arc units, a kind of accidental museum of the war, every piece of debris a story. The swamps at the base of the dam are dense and treacherous, full of cover, and also full of the kinds of smaller arc units that thrive in complex terrain. The buried city, Old Murano, is both a battlefield and an archaeology site. Raiders move through it in the specific awareness that they are walking through someone's neighborhood, that the walls they're using for cover once had family photographs hanging on them, that the cracked fountains in the public squares once provided water to children playing in the afternoon sun. There's a train station still bearing the name Murano, half swallowed by sediment. A hospital, a library, or what remains of one, the books mostly pulp. A few protected volumes, still readable if you can find them. A galleria, a shopping arcade, its storefronts still ghost gesturing toward the commerce they once hosted. The spaceport is the most historically layered location in the game. It is where the exodus happened, where the wealthy left and the rest were abandoned. The rocket assembly halls where those last ships were built are now full of the particular silence of places that once held enormous amounts of human effort and hope. The launch towers still stand, immensely tall, more monument now than machine. There are control rooms that raiders can pick through for supplies and data, And in those control rooms, if you look carefully, are fragments of the story of who stayed and who went and what it cost. Blue Gate is the newest of the significant locations, and in many ways the most forward-looking. It is a place of active discovery, a frontier even within the already frontier world of the Rust Belt. The quests that send raiders to Blue Gate are about investigation and repair, about pushing the edge of what's known and what's safe. Shani sends raiders there to find evidence of something called Project Heartwood, a piece of the world's history that has been deliberately buried, not by geological forces, but by people who didn't want it found. A dusty film reel, records in a locked room in a security wing. Someone has something to hide, and that something is in Blue Gate. Stella Montes is the most recently unlocked location, accessible only after the entire player community contributed enough resources to open it. A beautiful piece of live service storytelling that mirrors the game's themes of collective action and community effort. What Stella Montes contains, what its relationship to the larger story is still being uncovered. The breaking new ground event that opened it is an ongoing process of discovery. It is, in the truest sense, a frontier, a place where the next chapter of the story is being written right now, the ongoing arms race. One of the most fascinating ongoing lore developments in Ark Raiders is the technological arms race between Raiders and Ark. It is not a metaphor. It is a lived, daily reality for everyone in Toledo. Ark updates. This is something the lore confirms clearly and carefully. When Raiders develop new tactics, new weapons, new approaches to engaging Ark units, the machines adapt. Their security forces refine their designs in the face of new threats. The Ark units that a Raider fought 6 months ago are not quite the same as the Ark units they're fighting today. Small differences in patrol patterns, subtle changes in defensive behaviors, new unit types like the Vaporizer, introduced in the Flashpoint update. A flying machine that combines the fire attacks of the Firefly, the agility of the Wasp, the armor of the Rocketeer, and the energy shield of the Matriarch into something that felt, to every Raider who first encountered it, profoundly and personally designed to ruin their day. And conversely, Raiders adapt. The craftspeople of Speranza study captured Ark components. They reverse engineer. They develop new technologies based on what they learn. The energy shields that Raiders carry, a critical piece of defensive equipment that has saved countless lives on the topside, are built from Ark technology. The various energy-based gadgets in Raiders kits are built from Ark technology. The most advanced weapons being crafted in Speranza's workshops use materials salvaged from Ark units. This creates a beautiful and slightly uncomfortable loop. Every time you kill an Ark machine and bring its components back to Toledo, you're contributing to the next generation of Raider technology. The machines that are trying to kill you are also, inadvertently, arming you. Every successful extraction is a small victory in an arms race that has been going on for decades and shows no signs of ending. The assessors, a new threat and an old question. The assessors, those massive probes that descend from orbit during the closed scrutiny map condition, firing red beams into the sky that are visible for miles, represent a significant escalation in the lore. And the vaporizers that guard them are proof that ARC is capable of deploying assets specifically designed to protect specific operations. What are the assessors doing? The word itself is significant. An assessor evaluates, measures, takes stock. The assessors are, it appears, conducting a specific and intensive survey of particular areas. A survey important enough to warrant deploying vaporizer-class protection around them. The red beams they fire into the sky are almost certainly transmission signals, data being sent upward to wherever ARC's directives come from. The fan theory here is compelling. The assessors are reporting back. They're scanning areas where radar activity has been highest, where ARC units have been destroyed in the greatest numbers, and transmitting that data to whatever intelligence, organic or artificial, is directing the ARC program. The information they're sending up isn't geological. It's tactical. It's information about the humans who are fighting back. If that's true, if the assessors are specifically gathering intelligence on human resistance, then ARC is not just an automated resource extraction program. It is, or has become, specifically aware of Toledo, specifically aware of Speranza, and it is actively gathering information in preparation for something bigger, something the red beams in the sky are only the beginning of. Internal politics and the fractures of hope. Speranza is not a perfect place. Toledo is not a paradise. And Celeste, for all her brilliance and dedication, and the genuine love she has for this community she built, is not universally admired. The political reality of Toledo is messy in the way that all real politics are messy. Different neighborhoods have different priorities, different leaderships, different relationships with the raiders who risk the topside for supplies. Some civilian petitioners think the raiders have too much power, that the resources being spent on raider equipment could be spent on infrastructure or agriculture or medical care. Some neighborhood leaders think Celeste's vision of a unified raider force fighting a coherent war against ARC is naive. That coordination on that scale is impossible. That communities need to look after themselves. That alliances built on desperation don't last. And they're not entirely wrong. They're not entirely right either. The truth, as it always is in human communities under stress, is somewhere in between, contested and shifting. Raiders themselves are not a monolithic group. On the top side, cooperation is situational at best. Two squads might team up to bring down a harvester because neither of them could do it alone, and then part ways or fight each other over the loot. The same people who share a table in Speranza's bar and raise a glass to shared losses will, hours later, potentially be the obstacle standing between each other and a successful extraction. This is not hypocrisy. It is the honest reality of a world where resources are genuinely scarce and survival genuinely competes with solidarity. Celeste looks at this and finds it heartbreaking. She remembers Victory Ridge. She remembers what it felt like when people set aside their individual survival calculations and fought together towards something larger. She believes, she has to believe, that this is still possible, that the community that built Toledo can remember how to act like a community. Whether she's right is one of the defining unresolved questions of the game's ongoing story. Part 5, The Great MYSDRIS, THEORIS, SCCRETS, and the Shape of What's Coming. There are things about the world of Ark Raiders that no codex entry can tell you. Things that the game itself seems to be gesturing toward, but has not yet, and perhaps will never fully confirmed. These are the deep mysteries, the structural uncertainties, the narrative pressure points that make the world feel alive and unfinished and real. Let's spend time with each of them. Mystery 1. Where did the Exodus go? The people who left Earth, the wealthy, the privileged, the ones who boarded the rockets at the spaceport and ascended into the sky while everyone else stood in the smoke and watched them go. Where are they now? It is the year 2180 in Ark Raiders. The Exodus happened generations ago, probably at least a century in the past, possibly longer. That is a lot of time. Long enough for an entire interstellar civilization to have developed out there in the dark between stars. Long enough for those people to have built something extraordinary or terrible or both. The most optimistic theory: the Exodus survivors found a new world. They settled it. They flourished. And they have no idea, genuinely, sincerely no idea, that Earth is still inhabited, that people survived the collapse and the first wave and the second wave, that in the underground cities of the Rust Belt, there are still humans living and fighting and loving and burying their dead. In this version, the Ark machines are not a weapon. They are simply a resource extraction program that the Exodus civilization left running on autopilot. Because, from their perspective, Earth was empty. The knowledge that Earth is not empty, if it could somehow reach whoever is directing Ark, might change everything. The most pessimistic theory: the Exodus survivors know exactly what's happening on Earth. They know about the survivors. They know about Toledo and Speranza and the Raiders. And they are making a choice, actively and deliberately, to extract the resources of the planet anyway. Because the survivors are not their people anymore. Because their civilization has its own imperatives and its own resource needs. And a couple 100,000 humans living in underground cities don't factor into the calculations the way they used to. There's a middle theory that I find most narratively compelling. The Exodus survivors are divided. Some of them know. Some of them don't. Some of those who know want to help. Some want to continue the extraction. And there is a conflict among them, a political or ethical crisis, that we, from from our vantage point in Speranza, cannot see because it is happening somewhere very far away. This theory would explain the assessors sending data upward. It would explain the changes in Ark's tactical behavior. Someone somewhere is paying attention to what's happening on Earth. And whatever they're doing with that information is not simple. Mystery 2. What is Project Heartwood? Shani sends you to Blue Gate to find the records of Project Heartwood. A locked room, a security wing, a dusty film reel, the deliberate burial of information. The name is suggestive. Heartwood is the dense, innermost wood of a tree, the part that provides structural support, the core that the tree grows around. Calling a project Heartwood implies something foundational, something central, something that, if removed, might bring the whole structure down. Fan theories here are plentiful and wildly divergent. The most popular interpretation is that Project Heartwood was a pre-collapse research initiative into Ark, not a response to Ark, but anticipatory of it. That some organization or government body, before the first wave, had intelligence about what was coming, had, perhaps, made contact with whatever is directing Ark, and had made decisions, terrible, consequential decisions, about what to do with that information. If Project Heartwood was a pre-knowledge project, then the entire history of Ark's relationship with humanity changes. The first wave was not a surprise to everyone. Some people knew. Some people chose not to share what they knew. Some people perhaps made bargains. We don't know the terms, but we can guess at the shape. The spaceport was built suspiciously quickly given the scale of the undertaking. What if the resources, the technology, the political will to build those rockets was accelerated by a deal? You let the right people leave, and you leave the door open for the rest. There's a darker version of this theory that's been gaining traction in certain corners of the community. What if Project Heartwood wasn't just about knowing Ark was coming? What if it was about inviting Ark? What if the collapse was not merely ecological and geological bad luck, but was deliberately triggered or accelerated in order to clear the population of Earth for resource extraction? A conspiracy theory, to be sure, but in a world where the wealthy left on rockets and left everyone else to die, the moral baseline for what human beings are capable of doing to each other is already pretty low. The film reel is key. Film, physical, analog film, is a medium chosen specifically because it can't be easily altered or encrypted. Someone kept records on film because they wanted those records to be permanent, difficult to change, difficult to fake. They wanted future people who found those records to be able to see exactly what happened. They locked that room because they didn't want those records found. But they couldn't bring themselves to destroy them. That ambivalence, burying something instead of burning it, speaks to a conscience that couldn't quite go all the way. Mystery 3, the signal. The Ark Wiki notes, with careful vagueness, that a signal was detected, first in Speranza, and then later at the Red Tower hideout in Buried City. A signal that prompted enough concern that efforts were made to contain the news. The signal caused rumors to spread throughout Toledo. The signal was unusual enough, alarming enough, that the people who heard about it knew it meant something had changed. What was the signal? The community's leading theory. The signal was a direct transmission. Not from arc to arc, not the kind of internal communication that arc units use constantly to coordinate, but from whatever is directing arc to something or someone on Earth. A targeted message. A specific communication aimed at a specific recipient or location. If ARC has been operating entirely on autopilot for decades, following a program set long ago, then a targeted transmission would indicate that someone has taken the wheel again. That whoever or whatever originally launched the ARC program is paying direct, active, real-time attention to what's happening on Earth. And they sent a message. To whom? This is the fracture point where theories diverge most dramatically. Theory A. The message was meant for the surviving Exodus population, not yet confirmed to exist, but perhaps suspected. ARC's directing intelligence is reaching out across whatever communications channel still exists between Earth and wherever the Exodus went. Theory B. The message was meant for someone in Toledo specifically. Someone who has connections, family, organizational, contractual, to whoever is running the ARC program. This theory implies a mole, a double agent in Speranza. Someone who has been feeding information upward for years, and who is, perhaps, connected to whatever Project Heartwood revealed. Theory C. The message was meant for the ARC units themselves, a new directive, a change in mission parameters. And the reason it was alarming is that it represented an escalation, not extraction anymore, not ecological survey. Something different, something the people who understand ARC's original programming recognized as a departure from what the machines were supposed to be doing. The assessors arriving after the signal is suggestive. Close scrutiny, the map condition that deploys assessors and their vaporizer guards, could be read as the implementation of that new directive. Whatever was in the signal, the assessors are part of the response. Mystery 4. Lance and the question of machine consciousness. Lance, the medic android who lives in Speranza and heals its residents, is an anomaly in every sense. In a world where machines are trying to kill everyone, Lance is a machine that is trying to keep people alive. He is, as far as the lore establishes, an android, a constructed being, not born, but made. And he doesn't know everything about his own origins. This is extraordinary. A machine that doesn't know where it came from. A machine that has lived in a human community long enough to develop relationships, to be known and trusted and relied upon, to occupy a specific social role, and who, despite all of that, carries a blank space in his own history. The most interesting fan theory here is that Lance is a prototype, not a product of post-collapse improvisation, but a pre-collapse design, a medical android built in the era of technological flourishing, when humanity was still advancing, still exploring the possibilities of artificial consciousness. He survived the collapse, somehow. He survived the first wave. He found his way to Toledo and his purpose there. Healing people, any people, all people emerged from something in his programming, or developed over time into something that looks very much like a choice. If Lance is a pre-collapse design, then he predates Ark's arrival. He was made by humans who were trying to solve problems rather than create them. He is, in this reading, the road not taken, the version of a technological civilization that chose medicine over warfare, care over extraction. And here's the version of the theory that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. What if Lance and Ark share a lineage? What if the same pre-collapse technological tradition that produced Lance also produced, or was adapted to produce, the Ark program? What if there is something in Lance that is recognizable to Ark units, something in his code architecture that the machines register as familiar? What if that's why he's never been targeted? Why he moves safely through a world that kills everything else like him? What if Lance knows what Ark is, somewhere in his unremembered history, and has been protecting that knowledge from himself for reasons he can't yet articulate? Mystery 5. What does Ark want? We keep coming back to this. It's unavoidable, because everything else depends on it. If Ark is mindless, a program running without any goal beyond the execution of its original instructions, then the war against it is fundamentally unwinnable in any meaningful sense. You can fight it. You can destroy individual units. You can hold ground and buy time. But you can't reason with it, can't negotiate with it, can't find the equivalent of a peace table. You can only endure. But if Ark has developed something like intention, if decades of conflict with human resistance has produced, through the feedback loops of adaptive programming, something resembling a goal beyond mere resource extraction, then the situation is different. Not easier necessarily, but different, because something with a goal is something that can, theoretically, be thwarted, redirected, countered not just physically, but strategically. The assessors are the most powerful argument for Ark having developed something like intention. Assessing is not extracting. Assessing is planning. It implies a next step. It implies that the data being gathered is going to inform a decision, and that the decision has not yet been made, that there is still, somewhere in the machine's hierarchy, a process of evaluation happening, a weighing of options, a preparation for something specific and deliberate rather than something merely automatic. If Ark is planning, really planning, in the sense that implies goals and strategies and contingencies, then the question of what it is planning is the most important question in the world. And the raiders of Speranza, armed with repurposed Ark technology and a century of hard-won survival knowledge, are the only people in a position to find out the shape of what's coming. Live service games tell their stories in installments, and Ark Raiders is particularly thoughtful about how it deploys narrative information. The Flashpoint update, the most recent major addition to the game, released on March 31, 2026, introduced not just new enemies and weapons, but a new map condition and a new organizational structure called Arc Operations. These are not just gameplay features. They are story events, in-world escalations, evidence that something in the Arc program has shifted. The close scrutiny condition, with its assessors and vaporizers, represents a new level of targeted intelligence gathering. The Arc Operations framework suggests a more coordinated, more directed response from above. The High Gain Antenna Project, the community-wide effort to build a device capable of receiving and interpreting what the assessors are transmitting, is the most direct step the player community has taken toward actually understanding Arc rather than just fighting it. If that project succeeds, and it is already underway, already drawing on the resources and efforts of the entire Raider community, then the information it reveals will be a turning point. Not necessarily a victory, not necessarily even good news, but a turning point. This is how the best stories work. You can't always give people hope in the form of victory. Sometimes hope looks like knowledge. Sometimes hope looks like finally understanding what you're up against. Sometimes hope looks like standing in the wreckage of everything that came before and saying, "Now I know. Now I can choose what to do with knowing." Speranza means hope. And hope in this world is not naive optimism. It is not the belief that everything will be fine. It is the quieter, harder, more durable conviction that it is worth continuing, worth fighting, worth building, worth carrying the memory of the dead forward into a future they didn't get to see, and making that future worth the cost of getting there. A final fan theory, the two futures. Let me close with the theory that I keep coming back to. The one that seems to me to hold all the other theories together. In the world of Arc Raiders, there are two possible futures competing for the same timeline. In the first future, Arc finishes what it started. It strips the Earth of its resources, depletes whatever it came for, and moves on, leaving behind a planet that is finally completely empty. The last humans in Speranza run out of supplies, out of energy, out of the will to go topside one more time. Toledo goes dark. And somewhere out in the dark between the stars, someone, human or otherwise, notes that the program ran to completion. In the second future, someone makes contact. Maybe the High Gain antenna works. Maybe Project Heartwood's film reel contains a frequency, a code, a message left by someone who knew what was coming and left a key inside the lock. Maybe Lance remembers. Maybe the signal that echoed from Speranza to the Red Tower and back gets traced to its source. Maybe one raider on one extraction finds something in the wreckage of an assessor that changes the entire understanding of the situation. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding leads to a conversation, to a decision, to the possibility of something other than endless war. Both futures are equally possible in the current state of the lore. That balance, that genuine uncertainty, is what makes this world worth spending time in. It is a world that hasn't decided yet. A world where the actions of its people still matter. Where a community called Hope is still, against all odds, hopping. That's the story of Ark Raiders. All of it, the world that was, the collapse that ended it, the first wave that tested what survived, the underground city built from grief and engineering, and refusal to quit, the ongoing war that is never quite won and never quite lost, the mysteries that pile on top of each other like sediment over a buried city. If you're still awake, well done. This was a long road, but this world rewards the people who stay with it. It rewards the ones who read the codex entries and look at the rusty wreckage on the hillside and ask, who was here? What happened here? What does it mean? And if you fell asleep somewhere around part 3, that's okay too. The story was here. It'll be here again tomorrow. In the Rust Belt, the sun still rises over the topside, even if there's no one safe enough to watch it from above. Rest well, Raider. There's work to do in the morning.